Thank you. Perfect, thank you for having me. So as he said, my name's Liam Keegan. I'm from Dublin, Ireland, if you can't tell by the accent. And for the last 8 years, I've been writing professionally, and the last 4 to 5 years with a specific focus on documentation, and specifically for software companies. So during that time, something interesting that I've noticed as I've gotten more and more embedded in software documentation is the fact that everybody knows in a company that we need docs to help onboard customers, but nobody knows, or most people don't know, why exactly what they're doing once you create them, and what we should be tracking and what we should be doing about it. So in this talk, I'm going to cover how to get buy-in from your stakeholders in your company, how to make it more visible to them the impact of your work, and just generally speaking, how to actually measure the impact of your work. It's something for most of my professional career we didn't do with docs, and it's something in my most recent job at a company called Intercom that we've created a new model for measuring the impact, and thus being able to grow our teams, grow our impact, and take on new projects because we're looking at docs under a different lens. So before I start that, there's one existential question I need to ask of ourselves, and that is, why are we hired in the first place? So we might have ideas as to why we're hired, but the business might have different ideas again. And this kind of sets the tone as to how we're looked upon within the business, how we can grow within the business, and how we can influence the teams around us and what we do ourselves. So the main reasons why we're usually hired is to onboard new customers. I think I have a clicker issue. There we go. To onboard new customers, so to get people in the door, to understand how your software works, and to basically make it easier for them to understand what you offer. And then once they're in the door, to educate them and to help them understand how to become better users and more loyal customers for your business. And then also, support is a cornerstone, obviously, as well, of documentation too. We help reduce conversation volume, and we help our company scale by not having to create insanely expensive support teams. So with all that in mind, where should we sit? So when we are hired by maybe non-documentation teams, maybe by marketing professionals, maybe by developers, maybe by product teams, the first question to ask is, where do we sit? And usually the decision made around where do we sit is for operational reasons rather than for impact reasons. So it could be, okay, they need to sit beside the product team because that's what they're going to be writing about, and that's how they'll find out what they need to know to write their docs. Or they maybe should sit beside the support team because that is the team that they're going to impact the most, potentially. We'll see. So instead of asking where do we sit, I think the better question is, where do we fit? So if it was up to us to answer that question, maybe we'd create our own team that varies around between these various teams that we affect, and they're kind of like the islands that we travel to, but ultimately our own team. Or should we sit in a different team altogether that will help us grow our teams and help our business understand our impact? So here are 3 teams that I've noticed over the course of my career that documentarians tend to sit around. So the first one is the product team. So for obvious reasons, many documentarians sit with the product team, whether you're writing for users or you're writing for developers. You sit with the product team, you get immense value out of that because you'll probably understand products before it's even finished being built. And they'll also get a lot of value out of you. Sitting next to content designers, UX writers, product managers, they'll understand where the gaps in their products are, where content can actually fill those gaps, and how documentation can supplement I suppose, the whole experience for customers during beta period and when the product is launched. Similarly, the support team is another place that we impact hugely. So the support team obviously benefits usually from companies who provide self-service. Obviously not every company provides self-service, but the ones who do usually see a dramatic reduction in conversation volume for their support team, simply because the documentarians sit close to the support team, understand the questions that customers are regularly asking, understand the pain points, and therefore can help customers help themselves so they don't have to ask every time they encounter an issue. But what about marketing? So marketing isn't a team I have, up until my current role, seen documentarians sit in. It seems like a kind of an impure relationship, if you will. It's the world of landing pages and leads and conversion rates. Why would customer educators sit within this team? Well, it's in fact this strange marriage that has allowed us to reach the potential, I suppose, that our team can have and allow us to grow in new ways, and I'll explain that in just a couple of minutes. So, now we've just looked at the 3 teams that documentarians potentially support or could sit within. So before we actually look at the teams that we sit within, first we need to define what impact actually means in the first place. So depending on the team that you sit in, impact means an entirely different thing. And the way that you define impact is going to affect how your team grows and in response to what metrics and in response to what, I suppose, impact other teams are having. So for example, if you sat within the product team, the metrics that are important to product teams, therefore as a byproduct, might become important to documentarians as well. For example, if you're launching a new product, you have it in beta, and you're looking at feature adoption. Obviously, when you launch a new feature, adoption is very important to understand if it's actually useful. Documentation is going to have a big impact here if there's any complexity around the feature. For example, if it's I don't know, you're in beta phase and you've launched a new feature, you might say, okay, people who've read the doc are X% more likely to use the feature than people who haven't. Similarly, with actions taken, if you need to understand or if you need to activate users to get to a certain point to consider them a valuable user, product teams care about actions taken. So if they're activated, and docs will help customers do that because they help them understand how to get there. And then similarly, feedback, product teams, the ones that I know tend to stay quite close to their beta groups and will constantly take on feedback. Some of those pieces of feedback that they get could be on product deficiencies, but some of them, and a lot of them, will be just on understanding deficiencies, which again, docs fit into in a big way too. But does that mean if you want to grow your team of documentarians or customer educators that you're tied to feature adoption, that you're tied to how many features that your product team launches, and that means you're essentially tied to volume. So that means you can only grow if they grow. Similarly, with the support team, again, you'll be tied to the metrics that the support teams count. So for example, view count, which is one of the most flawed metrics going. For example, if you just look at article views, it could be skewed by a number of things. It could be skewed by that doc was part of a big product launch, so it's got a lot of views, or it's an essential doc to starting with your product, so it's gotten a lot of views. And obviously, these kind of docs are going to get more views than other ones who might have like 10% of the traffic. But without knowing the audience, without knowing kind of the signal from the noise, you can't actually know which docs are valuable. So if one doc is getting low traffic, but all that traffic is from your best users who all go on to take the right action afterwards, then it's actually a really valuable doc. Similarly, article ratings, one of the most common ways to measure self-service articles, like the ones that I write, they help you understand on a really high level that your article is doing its job. But unless you capture a comment with it, it actually doesn't tell you a whole lot, because in my experience, the articles that get the biggest negative ratings are the ones that have product deficiencies rather than content deficiencies. So again, that's useful information. You can loop it back to your product team, but it doesn't mean it's not a solid gold metric for documentarians to follow a lot of the time. And of course, if you are in the support team, conversation volume, seeing the most common issues, tracking them, and then writing articles for them and seeing the impact is another real business impact that docs do have, but not the only one. So what would marketing measure? This is a question that before I joined Intercom, I hadn't actually yet answered. I thought of a certain sort of acquisition models, attribution models for seeing how you could, I suppose, tie documentation to a customer's lifecycle. But at Intercom, where I work now, we have something called the CARE model. And it sounds really cheesy, but it works. And it's how we've actually managed to grow our team to new heights and to open new channels and do a lot more stuff. So what does the CARE model stand for? So convert, so winning new customers; activate, driving new usage and making new customers become active customers; retain, so retention, nurturing your power users, creating more loyal users; and then expanding their usage as well. You need to expand people. If you offer multiple products, the deeper and the more broader users are the ones who are going to stay around for longer. So what does that look like when applied to docs? So here is just some examples of how you could bucket your documentation into this acronym. So for example, your conversion docs are those ones at the very high level that probably appear really well in Google search. They're the ones that everybody who's going to even consider using your product will probably find and read. Things like your explainer docs, how your product works, your key features explained, or if you have really close competitors that's gotten pretty heated and you actually write switch docs about how you can actually go from them to you, which is quite a common thing. That's another example of a conversion doc, and you could bucket them that way. Then activation is much more closer to the product. So if you have a definition in your company or in your product team of what an active user looks like, and they need to take certain actions to become an active user, then you probably have a bunch of docs that relate to making them active users. For example, how to get them started, how to get them to create an article if your product was a help center. People who create an article or set an article live are therefore an active user, and the docs that explain that process are your activation docs. And then you might have examples of how your customers have already done it and different ways they've used it, and then templates to help people get started even faster. Then your retention articles are the ones that provide value beyond the product. So they show customers different ways to use your product and to get more value out of it. For example, best practices, you might do customer stories, or you might even, if you use your own product, you might write an article on how your company uses your own product to do X or do Y, just to give some best practices. And then you might offer some lessons via video or docs as well on ways to just to get more value out of the product and retain more customers, so people understand how to unlock those potentially hidden features. Then finally, expansion, and here is again very tied to marketing, but also very relevant to documentarians as well, and that is things like upsell docs. So if you have different pricing plans and products features are tied to certain pricing plans, you're probably going to write really convincing articles on the benefits of using the premium features, and they will be considered part of your expansion docs. Or if you have a range of products and some complement each other, you might write articles on how those two products complement each other and unlock new value for your customers. And then advanced training as well, which might again extend beyond documentation. So you might imagine the marketing funnel with leads, visitors, and conversions. This is kind of what it looks like for documentarians who work on the marketing team. So you can see there's multiple types of content there, and these are all the ones that the team I work on do. Our cornerstone and the pillar of our work is docs, but we do expand into things like webinars, videos, training, and other things as well. And in small growing companies, documentarians are usually the best positioned people to do this kind of work when headcount might be tight. So you can see here, docs plays a part in every stage of the CARE model. So how do you actually measure the impact with the CARE model? So here's just a nice light animated example. If your user, so this is actually assuming that you can track your people who read your articles and then take actions in your product. So if they read an article, and if the answer is yes, then you segment them into one side, or if they haven't, you segment them into another. And then as that continues to happen, you segment all your users into one side or another. Pretty simple, but just an easy way to start actually measuring the impact of your docs. So you'll see the conversion rate of one group versus the conversion rate of another. And then you might actually group your docs. So you might have these are all conversion docs, or these are all activation docs, and see does that group of articles actually contribute to a higher success rate than the people who don't read them. So then you can take that model and apply it to across the 4 buckets. You can go, are docs helping to convert users? Are more people becoming customers after they read documentation? Are they taking more actions? Are they becoming more active users after reading your documentation? Are we retaining more customers? Do people who read this specific set of docs actually stick around for longer? And do they ultimately pay more and use more too after reading a certain bunch of docs? So basically what you're measuring is uplift. You're taking one group and measuring it against another. And then it usually looks something like this. Based on our work, we have always seen a significant increase in the success rate in the people who read docs versus people who don't read docs. But of course, it's not that clean. There's a caveat. People who are actively reading docs are obviously much more likely to do the action because they're actively looking to educate themselves. So that means you need to take that information into account too. You have people who read docs and people who don't read docs, and then you can have a third segment of people who don't read docs, so you proactively send them the docs at the time that they should be reading them. So you have that third segment to say, okay, here are people who don't read docs and they convert at a certain rate. Here are people who do read docs and they convert at a certain rate. And then here's people who don't read docs, but we've sent them docs, and then a percentage of them have started reading docs, and then they've converted at a different rate again. And this is kind of proactive messaging that we would do a lot at Intercom through our product. And we've seen by doing this, taking this model, obviously the people who convert the highest are the people who are reading docs themselves because they're looking to educate themselves, but then those people who are being proactively messaged will convert at a higher rate than those who don't read docs at all. So it's worth getting it in front of them when you think they should be reading it during their life cycle. And then just to flesh it out, I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but here's what our, I suppose, care model looks like at Intercom. It takes in a lot of different content types. You've got best practice docs, you've got webinars, different kinds of content and training, and that's ultimately what the care model looks like for us when we're trying to impact our customers' journey and help them become better customers. And what happens next after we've, I suppose, formulated that model? Well, first start, we started taking on more experiments. We initially were a 2-person docs team, and now we are a 6-people team, 3 of whom are docs and 3 of whom are video. So ultimately, we are able to do more stuff and have a greater impact within these kind of, I suppose, semi-marketing, semi-docs metrics. But it means that we can have a tangible measurement tool rather than be tied to, say, support metrics or to be tied to product metrics, which don't always make complete sense. And then we have more channels. So like I said, we now actually take part in much more than just docs. We fleshed out our docs and tried different things, built out like what we consider to be expansion docs. They might be things that you never thought about writing because they're not complete education. But if you take on a project to work on just expansion docs, you might find that then that will have an impact on your expansion rate for your company. And then we do product activation webinars every month. So we work on webinars for different products that allow customers who are on those products to join those webinars and more likely to use the features after they join the webinar. And then you have training and your reference docs as well, which you can build out further. And of course, if there's more work, you get more people. And that the number of people and the headcount that you're arguing for is completely tied to impact and tied to your projects that you're working on that will ultimately increase your business impact. And speaking of impact, if you show that your work is actually having a similar or greater effect than the work of, say, your product marketing team or your lead gen team, then you're going to have more influence and you're going to gain a kind of more influential seat at the table and be, I guess, listened to more and have greater impact in the long term as well. So finally, docs mean business. That is the message to take away from this. Based on the models that we've come up with, kind of cheesy model, but it works. We've been able to show that docs can have a serious business impact. They probably already are for you, and it just means, I suppose, just being able to show that your docs are building a model that works for your company. Obviously, the care model is very much tied to trial-based businesses, B2B software. So just working out an attribution model that works for your business will help you gain impact, and overall grow your team to new levels. My clicker is asleep again. Thank you.